For countless centuries, humans had lived on a planet that many in the galaxy called a death world. It was a name given not because of any single war or disaster, but because of the very nature of life on that planet. Everything there seemed to fight for survival. From the moment a human was born, life was a challenge. The air was thick, the gravity stronger than most other planets, and the landscapes were filled with predators of every kind, some small and cunning, others massive and terrifying. It was a place where only the strong, the clever, and the resilient could survive. Children learned early that even a small mistake could cost them their lives, whether from a predator, a storm, or just the unforgiving environment. It was this constant struggle that shaped humanity in ways other species could never imagine. Humans, despite their reputation, were remarkable. They were adaptable, creative, and stubborn in ways that other species often found frightening. On their homeworld, humans had learned to fight not only against other creatures but also against the very planet itself. Storms could appear without warning, crushing villages and changing landscapes in a matter of minutes. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and sudden floods were common. The humans of this world learned to build their homes strong, to think ahead, to prepare for the worst, and to never underestimate the power of nature. In doing so, they became survivors on a scale no other species could claim. When aliens first discovered humans, they were cautious, even fearful. Most had never seen a species so dangerous yet so capable of surviving in conditions that would destroy any other form of life. They called them Deathworlders, a term meant to warn others of the humans' potential for violence and unpredictability. It was not entirely unfair. Life on their planet had made humans both fearless and aggressive when necessary. They were not naturally cruel, but they had learned to fight, and that fighting instinct ran deep in every human. From the youngest child to the oldest elder. As humans grew and spread across their planet, they faced many wars of their own. Tribes and nations battled for resources, for land, and for survival itself. These wars were not like the battles seen on peaceful planets. They were often brutal, raw, and unforgiving. Weapons were not only tools of war but also tools of survival. People learned to fight hand to hand, to plan strategies, and to adapt quickly when situations changed. Over time, this built not just physical strength but mental toughness. Humans became resourceful thinkers, capable of handling problems that would have stumped other species. Eventually, humans learned to look beyond their own world. They developed space travel, slowly at first, testing ships and learning to survive in the harsh environment of space. Their experiences on a dangerous homeworld had prepared them in ways that other species could not match. They built vessels strong enough to handle asteroid collisions, radiation storms, and the vacuum of space itself. Humans were explorers, but they were explorers forged in fire. Where other species might panic in a crisis, humans had already survived crises far worse on their own planet. This gave them confidence, even arrogance, in the eyes of the galaxy. Yet, despite all their skills and strength, humans remained outsiders in the wider universe. Many species respected them, but few trusted them. Their violent history, combined with their rapid adaptation and unpredictability, made other civilizations wary. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of multiple alien races meant to maintain peace, had learned to tolerate humans but kept a careful distance. Humans were useful allies in some cases, feared in others, and rarely fully understood by the time the story begins. Humans had settled into a relatively quiet era. Wars on their homeworld had ended, at least temporarily, and the focus shifted from survival to rebuilding. Cities grew stronger, technology improved, and humans began exploring interstellar relations, trying to prove that they were not just killers of their own world but potential allies in the galaxy. Captain Mara Vance, a decorated officer, represented the new human era. She was skilled, disciplined, and respected not only by her crew but also by those few aliens who had worked closely with humans. Despite this, she understood that the galaxy still feared humanity and that every decision she made could influence how others viewed her species. Even in this peaceful period, humans had not forgotten their roots. Training remained intense, and the fleet was always prepared for emergencies. Mara often reflected on how different humans were from other species, where other races relied heavily on rules, protocols, and careful deliberation. Humans relied on instinct, courage, and improvisation. It was this combination that made them both unpredictable and formidable. Then, one day, the unexpected happened. A distress signal arrived from an alien species, a species humans barely knew, and one that no other civilization seemed willing to help. It was a simple message, yet it carried urgency and fear. Under attack, casualties high, need immediate aid. Anyone, please respond. The message was fragmented, but its meaning was clear. Someone was suffering, and help was needed immediately. For humans, this was unusual. No alien race had called upon them for assistance in living memory. Many species considered humans too violent, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to trust with such responsibilities. Yet the Terrans humans could not ignore it. Something deep within their culture, forged over millennia of surviving a harsh and unforgiving planet, compelled them to respond. Humans understood struggle, and when they sensed that life was in danger, hesitation was never part of their nature. Captain Vance received the message first, and it ignited a chain reaction. The fleet mobilized quickly, assessing the situation and preparing for potential threats. Unlike other species, humans did not spend months debating protocols or waiting for council approval. Time mattered, lives mattered, and the urgency of the SOS demanded action. Mara felt the weight of responsibility, knowing that the decision she and her fleet made in the next few hours could change not only the fate of the aliens but also the galaxy's perception of humanity. This moment was significant not only because of the SOS but also because it marked a turning point in human history. For centuries, humans had been outsiders, feared, respected, and occasionally avoided. Now, they had the opportunity to prove that they could act not only with strength but also with compassion. The distress signal challenged humans to rise above their reputation and demonstrate that their ferocity could be matched with empathy. And so, in the quiet of space, aboard massive warships designed for battle but ready for rescue, humans prepared to act. The galaxy had long assumed that the Deathworlders responded only with destruction. Now, an SOS had arrived that demanded a different kind of response, one that would test everything humans had learned about courage, survival, and moral choice. In this moment, the stage was set, and humanity's story was about to change forever. After the distress signal reached the Terran fleet, the atmosphere aboard the command ship was tense, filled with a mixture of curiosity, concern, and anticipation. The message itself was unlike anything humans had received before. It came from Valoria, a distant planet on the edge of known galactic space. The Valorians were a peaceful race, small in number but wise and gentle in nature. They had lived for centuries in harmony with their environment, relying on diplomacy rather than weapons, trade rather than force. Their colonies were known for their beautiful floating cities, lush landscapes, and intricate architecture that harmonized with nature. The Valorians had never been involved in wars, never asked for help in conflicts, and their lives were quiet and orderly. This made their SOS message all the more shocking. The message was fragmented, a jumble of panic and desperation. Under attack, casualties high, need immediate aid. Anyone, please respond. It repeated over and over in short bursts, suggesting a failure in their communication systems. Humans listening to it could hear fear in every pause, a sense of helplessness that struck even the most battle-hardened officers. It was clear that something unprecedented was happening. Mara Vance and her crew quickly realized the Valorians were facing a threat they could not handle alone. The attackers were unknown, but the Valorians' reputation made it unlikely that this was a simple rebellion or accident. Something dangerous was happening, something that required immediate action. Back at the Galactic Concord Council, representatives from multiple species were gathered. Most were deliberating slowly, weighing options, discussing protocols, and considering political ramifications. Valoria, they agreed, was important but not critical. Many argued that it was too far, that the attackers were unidentified, and that sending a fleet could provoke a larger conflict. A few voices spoke cautiously about humans, mentioning their history and unpredictability. Perhaps they could intervene, one diplomat suggested. But are we willing to risk it? Most others shook their heads. The council debated endlessly while the Valorian colonies struggled for survival, unaware that their cries for help were being stalled by bureaucratic hesitation. Meanwhile, the Terran fleet had received a distress signal by chance. A listening post on the outskirts of human space had intercepted the SOS while monitoring distant frequencies. The message was immediately flagged as urgent and forwarded to High Command. Captain Mara Vance studied the data, analyzing every word, every signal pattern, every fragment of information that could give a clue about the attackers or the scale of the disaster. The more she examined the message, the clearer it became. The Valorians were in grave danger, and no one else seemed willing to act. The Council's hesitation, the alien bureaucracy, and the endless debates suddenly felt irrelevant. For humans, the decision was simple. Someone needed to help. Humans had a reputation for swift action in crises. Unlike many other species, they did not wait for approvals or committees when lives were at stake. This characteristic was deeply rooted in their history. Life on a death world had taught humans that hesitation often meant death. Decisions had to be made quickly, decisively, and effectively. It was this mindset that Captain Vance brought to the situation. She called an emergency meeting with her senior officers, explaining the situation and outlining her perspective. "This is not a drill," she said firmly. "The Valorians are in trouble, and if we do nothing, they will be destroyed. The council may debate endlessly, but we cannot wait. We act, or they die." Her officers nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Though some were cautious, all respected Vance's leadership and her ability to make quick, rational decisions under pressure. Plans began forming immediately. The fleet would prepare for a long-range mission, mobilizing ships, weapons, medical units, and logistical support. Every detail was scrutinized, from travel routes through uncharted space to potential enemy threats along the way. Humans had become masters of preparation precisely because their world had demanded it. Now, that expertise would be tested beyond anything they had faced before. The Valorian situation itself was more complicated than it first appeared. Information was limited, and much of it came from fragmented SOS signals. Mara and her team had to make inferences. The attackers were organized, powerful, and aggressive. They had managed to cripple communications, indicating a level of sophistication far beyond random raiders or small hostile forces. The Valorian colonies were under severe threat, with casualties mounting and defenses failing. There was no time to wait for reinforcements from other species, and every minute delayed meant more lives lost. Despite the urgency, Mara also considered the nature of the humans knew that the Valorians were not combatants. They relied on intelligence, negotiation, and technology that enhanced their environment rather than weapons. Any human intervention had to account for this, ensuring that they could protect the Valorians without causing unintended harm. Mara carefully reviewed maps of Valoria simulations of the colonies and the few available details about the attackers. Every plan was adjusted to minimize risk for the civilians while maximizing efficiency and stopping the threat. As the fleet prepared for departure, tension among human officers was palpable. For some, this was exciting, a chance to test their skills in space, to protect lives, and to demonstrate human strength and capability. For others, it was anxiety to a reminder that the unknown dangers of space could overwhelm even the best prepared crew. Captain Vance addressed these concerns with her usual calm authority, reminding everyone of their training, experience, and duty. "We are the Terran fleet," she said. "We face danger every day. This is no different. We are capable, we are prepared, and we will act with precision and purpose." The fleet's departure was a spectacle in itself. Massive ships powered up, engines glowing with the energy of advanced propulsion systems designed for speed and endurance. Medical ships and transport vessels carried essential supplies, while combat ships formed protective formations around the fleet's core. Humans watched as the ships moved as a single coordinated unit, each crew member aware of their role and responsibilities. The fleet's departure sent a signal across the galaxy. Humanity was no longer content to sit on the sidelines while others suffered. They would act when action was needed, no matter the risks. As the fleet journeyed through space, the crew faced challenges that tested their skills and resolve. Communication with Valoria remained sporadic, the distances immense, and the potential for ambush high. Navigation through uncharted space required constant vigilance, and minor mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. But the humans were unflinching. Their training, honed over centuries of survival on a hostile planet, prepared them to handle uncertainty, danger, and stress with remarkable efficiency. They adapted quickly to changing conditions, improvising when necessary, and maintaining focus on their ultimate goal, reaching Valoria in time to save the lives of those in peril. During this journey, human officers reflected on the unusual nature of the mission. They had participated in border patrols, routine conflicts, and emergency rescues, but never had they received an SOS from a peaceful alien race so far from human space. It was both humbling and motivating. They understood that their actions could change perceptions of humanity across the galaxy. If they succeeded, they could demonstrate that humans were not merely fearsome warriors or survivors of a harsh planet. They could also be protectors, allies, and saviors. The stakes were high, but the crew's determination was higher. Meanwhile, back on Valoria, the situation continued to deteriorate. The attackers advanced, systematically targeting the colonies, cutting off communication channels, and creating chaos. Civilians fled to shelters in caves, trying desperately to survive the assault. The Valorian leaders, wise but inexperienced in combat, struggled to coordinate defenses. Every passing hour brought more destruction and loss, and hope began to fade. Yet, even in this darkness, the Valorians did not give up. They continued to send fragmented messages, calling for anyone at all to respond. Their faith in the possibility of help, even in the face of overwhelming danger, it became a quiet but powerful thread that tied the story together for the Terran fleet. These messages were both a guide and a reminder of the urgency. Every SOS signal received reminded them that lives were at stake. It was not merely a mission, it was a responsibility. Captain Vance and her officers constantly reviewed the incoming signals, piecing together the limited information, and adjusting their strategy to ensure maximum effectiveness upon arrival. Every decision, every maneuver, every calculation was made with precision, reflecting the disciplined mindset that had allowed humans to survive and thrive on a dangerous world for so long. By the time the fleet neared Valoria, the tension had reached its peak. Humans understood that the next phase of their journey would determine the fate of an entire species. Their training, preparation, and determination would be tested to the limit. Yet despite the pressure, they were ready. They had faced adversity before, survived impossible odds, and emerged stronger each time. Now, they would face a challenge unlike any other, not a battle on their own planet, but a rescue mission in the far reaches of space, where every decision mattered and failure was not an option. The humans, forged by hardship, were about to prove that their courage and capability extended far beyond their own world. The Valorians, unaware of the full scope of help that was coming, held on to hope, sending signals into the void, waiting for anyone to answer. And in this moment, the galaxy held its breath. waiting to see how the Deathworlders would respond when faced with a species in desperate need of aid. As the Terran fleet moved closer to Valor, the crew could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on them. Every officer, every sailor, and every pilot understood that they were heading into a scenario that could define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations. The distress signals had grown more frequent, more desperate, and more fragmented, which indicated that the attackers were methodical and efficient. Unlike random space pirates or rogue mercenaries, the enemy displayed a level of coordination that suggested strategic planning, experience, and intent to destroy the Valorian colonies entirely. Captain Mara Vance understood that hesitation or error could cost countless innocent lives, and she prepared her fleet accordingly. The Valorians themselves were a peaceful, gentle race. They had never developed offensive military capabilities because their culture revolved around negotiation, art, science, and harmony with nature. The Valorians' defenses, if they could even be called that, were designed to protect infrastructure rather than repel a determined assault. Simple energy shields could slow intruders but could not stop a coordinated attack by a hostile species with advanced technology and combat experience. As the fleet analyzed the data, it became clear that the attackers had identified the weaknesses in Valorian defenses and were exploiting them. Structures were being destroyed systematically, communication hubs targeted first, and civilians were forced into hiding. The Valorians' fear was evident, and the Terran fleet felt the urgency of the situation deep in their bones. Meanwhile, the identity of the attackers began to emerge. They were part of the Kyrax Dominion, a notorious military power known across the galaxy for aggressive expansion and conquest. The Kyrax were feared for their ruthlessness. They had destroyed entire colonies, often leaving no survivors, and their forces were highly disciplined, heavily armed, and strategically skilled. The Terrans' intelligence indicated that the Kyrax had calculated their attack carefully, targeting Valoria specifically because they expected minimal resistance. The peaceful nature of the Valorians made them an easy target, or so the Kyrax thought. Captain Vance and her officers had to make fast, strategic decisions. Unlike the Kyrax, the Terrans were not invaders seeking to conquer or enslave. Their mission was rescue and protection. This required careful planning and adaptability. The fleet had to navigate unknown space, anticipate enemy tactics, and coordinate multiple ships and teams, all while minimizing risk to civilians. Mara spent hours reviewing maps, simulations, and fragmented signals, running countless scenarios in her mind. Each officer contributed, drawing on their training and experience. Until a clear plan emerged, the fleet would strike swiftly, with precision, and with the full force of human strategy, but always with the safety of the Valorians as the priority. The rising conflict was not only external but internal. Within the Terran command, officers debated the best way to engage. Some advocated a direct assault on the Kyrax fleet, prioritizing the destruction of enemy forces even if it risked collateral damage. Others recommended a more cautious approach, focusing on rescue operations and protecting civilians, even if it meant prolonging the conflict. Captain Vance listened carefully, weighed the arguments, and made the decision that defined her leadership style, a combination of strength and calculated risk. She decided to engage the Kyrax aggressively to eliminate the threat, but she instructed all units to prioritize civilian safety. Humans, after centuries of surviving harsh environments and deadly predators, had developed an instinctive ability to balance force with precision, a skill that now became critical. The first signs of the Kyrax presence appeared as the fleet approached Valor. Sensors detected warships arranged in blockade patterns, preventing escape from the planet's orbit. The Kyrax ships were heavily armed, their weapon systems ready to fire, and their tactics clearly designed to intimidate and delay any rescue attempt. The sight was intimidating even for battle-hardened humans. Some officers felt a flicker of doubt, questioning whether they could break the blockade without incurring heavy losses. Captain Vance, however, remained calm, knowing that fear and hesitation were luxuries they could not afford. She reminded her officers that humans were adaptable, resilient, and capable of facing threats far greater than any conventional expectation. As the fleet prepared for engagement, communication with the Valorians became even more urgent. The SOS signals indicated that some colonies were under direct attack, civilians trapped in buildings, and defensive systems failing. Mara ordered the fleet to prioritize areas with the highest concentration of signals, identifying hotspots where intervention could save the most lives. This required coordination between space-based combat units, transport and rescue teams, and long-range intelligence scanners. Every maneuver had to be precise, calculated, and executed under pressure. The humans' ability to operate under stress was unparalleled in the galaxy, a product of generations surviving a world where a single misstep could be fatal. The rising tension was not limited to the battlefield. On the human ships, officers and crew grappled with the emotional weight of what they were about to face. Unlike other missions that involved training exercises or simulations, this was real. Lives hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. Some crew members experienced fear, doubt, and anxiety, but these emotions were tempered by a sense of duty and responsibility. Humans had long learned to channel emotion into action, transforming fear into focus and doubt into determination. The Terran fleet was about to demonstrate this in a way that would leave a lasting impression across the galaxy. Meanwhile, the Kyrax observed the approaching Terran fleet with growing frustration. They expected minimal resistance and were unprepared for the speed and decisiveness of the humans. Their communications indicated confusion as the Terrans bypassed standard protocols, outmaneuvering blockades, and preparing for direct engagement. The Kyrax Dominion, used to dominating weaker species, now faced an opponent whose unpredictability and boldness threatened to disrupt their carefully laid plans. The rising conflict intensified as both sides prepared for inevitable confrontation. As the fleet closed in on Valoria, Mara implemented a multi-layered strategy. The first layer involved engaging the Kyrax blockade, creating a corridor for rescue ships to reach the most vulnerable colonies. The second layer focused on disabling the attackers' communications and weapons systems to prevent coordinated strikes against civilians. The third layer involved direct rescue operations, deploying teams to evacuate trapped Valorians and provide immediate medical aid. Every element of the strategy relied on speed, precision, and adaptability. The Terran approach combined aggression with careful planning, a balance honed by centuries of survival on their dangerous homeworld. The rising conflict reached its peak when the Terran fleet first made contact with Kyrax forces. Skirmishes erupted in space above Valoria with energy beams, missiles, and advanced targeting systems creating spectacular displays of combat. The humans' tactics emphasized coordination and surprise. They struck from unexpected angles, anticipated enemy movements, and used electronic countermeasures to disrupt Kyrax systems. While the Kyrax relied on brute force and intimidation, the humans leveraged strategy, adaptability, and relentless focus on the mission. Each engagement was calculated, with every maneuver designed to reduce risk to Valorian civilians, while maximizing pressure on the enemy. On the planet's surface, Valorian civilians watched the sky with a mix of awe and fear. They had never witnessed combat of this magnitude and had no experience defending themselves. The sight of human ships engaging the Kyrax, however, sparked a glimmer of hope. Signals from the Terran fleet reassured the Valorians that help had arrived, giving them courage to survive another day. The presence of humans, despite the violence in orbit, inspired resilience among the Valorians, reminding them that they were not alone in their struggle. The conflict escalated further when the Kyrax realized the humans were not simply reacting, they were planning, anticipating, and outmaneuvering every attack. Mara Vance's fleet demonstrated an ability to adapt mid-battle, shifting formations, reallocating resources, and responding to unforeseen developments. Humans excelled under pressure, a trait cultivated through millennia of surviving harsh environments and constant threats. The Kyrax Dominion, used to quick victories, now faced a relentless strategic force determined to protect innocent lives. As the battle intensified, the stakes became clear to all involved. The Valorians' survival depended on the Terran's success, and failure was unthinkable. The humans' rising determination mirrored the rising conflict in space. Officers worked tirelessly, coordinating fleets, monitoring communications, and adjusting strategies to maintain advantage. Mara's leadership became a guiding force, ensuring that even under extreme pressure, the fleet operated as a cohesive unit. Her calm decisiveness inspired confidence and trust among her crew, reinforcing the human reputation for resilience and strategic ingenuity. Throughout this phase, the story highlighted the stark contrast between the humans and the Q. The Kyrax relied on fear, intimidation, and superior firepower, while humans relied on intelligence, adaptability, and a moral imperative to protect life. The conflict was not merely a battle for territory, it was a battle of values, demonstrating that strength could be wielded responsibly. The rising tension underscored the humans' unique approach. They were capable of extraordinary violence, but only in the service of justice and protection, not conquest or domination. As the Terran fleet pressed forward, the situation continued to evolve. New intelligence suggested that the Kyrax had set traps, hidden forces, and secondary objectives designed to prolong the battle and maximize Valorian casualties. Humans responded with flexibility, deploying reconnaissance drones, diversionary maneuvers, and targeted strikes. Each move reflected their ability to think several steps ahead, anticipate enemy strategies, and adapt to rapidly changing conditions. The rising conflict was not simply a physical struggle, it was a mental and tactical battle, with every decision carrying immense consequences. The Terran fleet had fully engaged in the conflict. Space above Valoria was alive with combat, civilians awaited rescue, and the Kyrax Dominion struggled to maintain control. The rising tension, the calculated strategies, and the determination of humans set the stage for the next critical phase, the breaking point. At this moment, the galaxy began to witness the extraordinary capability of the Deathworlders, how a species shaped by hardship, survival, and determination could rise to meet impossible challenges with courage, skill, and unwavering commitment to life itself. The rising conflict phase, therefore, was not just about approaching a battle, it was about preparation, adaptation, moral clarity, and relentless focus on the goal. It demonstrated how humans could transform fear into action, chaos into strategy, and desperation into hope. This phase built the suspense, laid the groundwork for confrontation, and highlighted the unique qualities that made humans both feared and respected across the galaxy. The moment of breaking point arrived as the Terran fleet entered the orbit of Valoria, and the scale of the disaster became fully visible. From space, the humans could see entire colonies engulfed in flames, smoke rising from the once pristine cities, and defensive structures shattered beyond repair. The SOS signals had become frantic, almost continuous, and every officer aboard the command ship felt the weight of urgency pressing down like gravity. Captain Mara Vance understood that hesitation now would mean disaster, not just for the Valorians but potentially for the galaxy's perception of humanity. The breaking point was not a single moment. It was the accumulation of tension, danger, and responsibility converging into a point where decisive action was no longer optional. It was unavoidable. The Kyrax Dominion had entrenched themselves in the planet's orbit with overwhelming force. Their warships were positioned to block any escape, their weapons systems calibrated for maximum destruction, and their strategy designed to trap both Valorian civilians and any potential rescuers. The Kyrax commanders, confident in their ability to crush the Valorians, had not anticipated a fleet like the Terrans arriving so swiftly. Their arrogance would become their weakness. The breaking point for the humans was that they were now directly in harm's way, facing a superior force in numbers and firepower. Every calculation, every maneuver, and every command would be tested to its limits. Captain Vance called her senior officers to the bridge. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. She knew that every second counted and that the decisions made in the next few moments would determine whether thousands of Valorians would survive or perish. The situation was dire. The Kyrax were ruthless, organized, and determined, and the Valorian colonies were vulnerable and unprepared for sustained combat. Mara's calm, steady voice cut through the rising panic among her crew. This is the moment we were trained for. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to save lives. Every decision must be deliberate, every action precise. We go in hard, we go in fast, and we go in smart. Nothing less will do. The fleet began its approach with a coordinated assault pattern. Instead of charging recklessly into the Kyrax blockade, Mara deployed decoy ships and electronic countermeasures to confuse the enemy. Smaller, faster vessels darted between larger warships, creating openings and drawing enemy fire away from critical areas. The Terran strategy relied on overwhelming the Kyrax with speed, coordination, and tactical ingenuity rather than sheer brute force. Each movement was calculated to maximize damage to the enemy while minimizing risk to Valorian civilians below. This phase of the operation showcased the humans' unique ability to adapt under pressure, a skill honed over centuries of survival on their homeworld. On the planet's surface, Valorian civilians were in chaos. Fires raged, shelters collapsed, and panicked citizens scrambled for safety. The Valorian leaders, who had been attempting to coordinate defensive efforts, were now helpless against the Kyrax onslaught. It was clear that without external assistance, many of the colonies would be completely destroyed. When the first Terran ships appeared in orbit, a wave of hope surged among the Valorians. They had never seen combat, and the arrival of human spheres organized and determined was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. For the first time, they glimpsed the possibility of survival. The Kyrax, realizing that the Terrans were not merely another obstacle but a serious threat, escalated their attacks. Energy beams, missiles, and electronic warfare targeted the fleet, attempting to destabilize their formation. The breaking point for the humans was the intensity of the assault. Ships were damaged, systems malfunctioned, and moments of uncertainty arose. Yet through it all, Mara's leadership ensured focus and cohesion. She moved between commands, monitoring every angle of engagement, adjusting strategies in real time, and ensuring that her officers remained calm and effective. The breaking point was a test of human endurance, skill, and leadership under extreme stress. Simultaneously, the human fleet began deploying ground teams to key locations. Rescue shuttles descended into the planet's most threatened areas, guided by the remaining Valorian signals. These shuttles carried not only armed units to secure perimeters but also medical personnel, supplies, and equipment for civilian evacuation. The breaking point here was the coordination required. Multiple teams had to operate simultaneously in areas under direct attack, communicate in real time with the fleet above, and adapt instantly to changing conditions on the ground. Every decision could mean life or death, and the Terrans were acutely aware of the stakes. As battles raged in orbit and on the planet's surface, the Kyrax commanders began to realize that the humans' approach was unlike anything they had encountered. The Terrans did not simply react, they anticipated, adapted, and executed with precision. They exploited weaknesses in the Kyrax formations, diverted attention away from critical targets, and created openings for rescue operations. Each successful maneuver increased the pressure on the Kyrax, forcing them to commit more resources to defense rather than offense. The breaking point of the conflict was approaching. not as a single moment, but as a culmination of relentless human strategy, skill, and courage. In the chaos, individual acts of heroism emerged. Pilots executed daring maneuvers to protect shuttles, medics braved active combat zones to reach the wounded, and soldiers fought in unfamiliar terrain to create safe corridors for civilians. These acts highlighted the human capacity for courage under extreme conditions. Each individual action contributed to the larger mission, reinforcing the theme that the breaking point was not only about the fleet or the strategy but also about the courage and determination of each person involved. Communication between Terran units became critical. Sensors and scanners identified enemy positions, civilian locations, and environmental hazards in real time. Every piece of information was used to make rapid decisions. The breaking point here was the sheer speed at which humans had to process information, react, and implement strategies without errors. Unlike many other species that relied heavily on rigid protocols, humans relied on adaptability and critical thinking. This allowed them to exploit openings in the Kirax defenses and save lives that would otherwise have been lost. The Kirax, now under sustained pressure, attempted a desperate counterattack. They targeted evacuation routes, tried to disable Terran command systems, and concentrated fire on the heaviest human warships. The intensity of this attack marked the emotional and tactical climax of the breaking point. The Terrans faced real danger, yet their response was coordinated, disciplined, and relentless. Mara's decisions were decisive. She prioritized the protection of civilians, ensured the integrity of her fleet, and maintained offensive pressure to weaken the enemy's resolve. This delicate balance exemplified the essence of the breaking point, the moment when human resilience, courage, and skill were tested to the absolute limit. As the battle reached its zenith, Valorian civilians watched in awe. Fires raged, explosions shook the ground, and ships blazed across the skies. Yet despite the chaos, hope endured. The arrival of humans, their precision and bravery, inspired the Valorians to survive and hold on. Signals from the fleet reassured them that evacuation was possible, and instructions guided them to temporary safe zones. In these moments, the breaking point was not only a human struggle but also a turning point for the Valorians, a moment where they realized that survival was possible, thanks to the Deathworlders' intervention. The Terran fleet's ground units began evacuating civilians systematically. Shuttles carried families, the wounded, and essential supplies to temporary shelters. Soldiers cleared debris, neutralized remaining threats, and coordinated with orbital support to maintain protection. The breaking point for the human teams on the ground was the constant danger. Enemy forces could strike at any moment. Environmental hazards were severe, and communication was limited. Yet their training, experience, and determination allowed them to execute their mission with remarkable efficiency. Every life saved reinforced the purpose and necessity of their intervention. Above Valoria, the Kirax realized their advantage had evaporated. Their blockade was disrupted, key positions compromised, and their strategy no longer effective. The humans had turned the tide not through superior numbers alone, but through superior strategy, adaptability, and moral determination. The breaking point of the conflict marked a shift from chaos and uncertainty to controlled, coordinated human action that steadily reclaimed the initiative. The Kirax were forced onto the defensive, reacting to human tactics rather than controlling the situation. Captain Vance made critical strategic decisions that defined the breaking point. She ordered concentrated strikes against the Kirax command vessels, knowing that disabling the leadership would cause confusion among enemy forces. Simultaneously, she ensured evacuation operations continued without interruption, showing an extraordinary ability to balance offensive action with protection of innocence. Her decisions reflected the essence of human problem-solving, combining courage, intelligence, and moral clarity to achieve objectives that others might consider impossible. As the breaking point reached its climax, the Terran fleet had neutralized the primary threats to evacuation routes were secure, key enemy positions disrupted, and the Kirax were in retreat. The tension remained high, but the decisive actions of humans had shifted the balance of power. The breaking point was not a singular explosive event, but a culmination of relentless effort, strategic brilliance, and unwavering courage. It was the moment when the full capability of the Deathworlders became evident, proving that humans could face overwhelming odds and emerge with lives saved and objectives achieved. The witnessing the transformation of the battlefield, experienced a profound mixture of fear, relief, and awe. Their peaceful lives had been shattered, yet the humans' intervention gave them hope. The breaking point had tested the limits of human and alien endurance alike, and it was in this crucible that respect, trust, and admiration for humanity were forged. The Valorians would remember this moment for generations, a time when the feared Deathworlders showed not just strength, but compassion, determination, and the willingness to protect life at any cost. The Terran fleet had demonstrated extraordinary courage and capability. The Valorians were partially rescued and protected, and the Kirax had been forced to reconsider their approach. The moment had tested every skill, decision, and instinct the humans possessed, and it had solidified their reputation as a force capable of extraordinary action in the face of overwhelming odds. The breaking point phase set the stage for the resolution that would follow, demonstrating the true power of humans when guided by purpose, skill, and the will to save lives. After the intense and chaotic breaking point above Valor, the Terran fleet moved decisively into the resolution phase of the mission. The battle was not yet fully over, but the most critical danger had been managed, and the focus shifted from pure combat to ensuring that the Valorians were safe and that the Kyrax forces were driven away completely. Captain Mara Vance understood that victory was not measured merely by the destruction of enemy ships or the success of military maneuvers. It was measured by how many lives were saved, how much stability could be restored, and whether the Valorians could begin to rebuild. The resolution phase was the time to consolidate gains, secure the planet, and begin the painstaking work of restoration. The first step in this phase involved assessing the damage and securing the immediate vicinity. Terran reconnaissance drones scanned the planet, identifying remaining Kyrax positions, collapsed structures, fires, and pockets of civilians who were still trapped or in danger. The situation on the ground was grim. Entire neighborhoods had been flattened, energy shields had been destroyed, and infrastructure that the Valorians relied upon for communication, water, and electricity was heavily damaged. Despite this devastation, the Terran team remained calm and methodical, applying the same discipline that had brought them through the breaking point. Their focus was clear: prevent further loss of life, stabilize the environment, and neutralize any lingering threats simultaneously. The Kyrax, realizing that the humans had regained the initiative, began a systematic retreat. Their command structures were disrupted, key warships had been damaged or destroyed, and their strategies were now reactive rather than proactive. The Terran fleet used this opportunity to press forward carefully, targeting retreating Kyrax units to ensure they could not regroup and launch another attack. Mara's orders were precise. The humans would not overextend themselves or engage in reckless destruction, but they would neutralize any immediate threat. This balanced approach reflected a core principle that had guided the humans throughout the mission: strength must be paired with purpose, and violence should be a tool for protection, not wanton destruction. On Valoria's surface, the resolution phase required an enormous logistical effort. Evacuation and rescue operations were intensified, with shuttles and transports moving continuously between safe zones and areas still threatened by enemy remnants. Medical teams established temporary field hospitals to treat the wounded, while engineers began assessing structural damage and initiating repairs where possible. Every Terran unit was coordinated through a centralized command structure, allowing for efficient allocation of resources and rapid response to unexpected challenges. The scene was chaotic yet organized, a testament to human planning and adaptability in the most extreme conditions. The Valorians, witnessing this coordinated effort, experienced a mixture of relief, astonishment, and gratitude. They had never seen such decisive and organized action, and the scale of the Terran intervention far exceeded their expectations. Children, families, and elderly citizens, many of whom had feared the worst, were now being safely evacuated and treated. The Valorians began to understand that the humans who had arrived as Deathworlders, a term they had once associated with fear and danger, were not there to dominate or harm them. Instead, they were there to save, protect, and restore hope. This revelation marked a critical turning point in the mission's resolution phase. The humans were no longer simply combatants, they had become guardians in the eyes of those they rescued. In space, the Terran fleet maintained vigilance, ensuring that no remaining Kyrax forces could launch surprise attacks. Mara's strategic decisions were decisive during this period. She deployed reconnaissance drones to monitor escape routes and potential ambush points, coordinated with planetary units to protect civilians during reconstruction, and maintained communication with Valorian leaders to coordinate relief efforts. The resolution phase required patience as much as strength. It was no longer enough to fight. That humans now had to manage stability, logistics, and trust, ensuring that the Valorians could survive in the immediate aftermath of the battle. During this period, the Terran medical teams worked tirelessly. Many Valorians were injured, suffering from burns, fractures, and shock from the attacks. Human medics brought advanced technology and expertise to the planet, stabilizing the wounded, performing emergency procedures in makeshift clinics, and coordinating care to ensure that every life was attended to. The resolution phase highlighted not only the humans' combat ability but also their capacity for empathy, care, and detailed planning. Strength without compassion would have left the mission incomplete, but the Terrans understood that the measure of success lay in the lives they saved and the suffering they alleviated. One of the most challenging tasks during the resolution phase involved restoring infrastructure. Valorian communication arrays had been destroyed, leaving many isolated pockets of survivors cut off from information and aid. The Terran engineers worked quickly to repair power grids, rebuild communication lines, and restore basic services. This allowed Valorian leaders to begin organizing their people, coordinating safe zones, and re-establishing control over critical areas. The process was painstaking, but it was essential for long-term survival and recovery. The resolution phase demonstrated that human skill extended beyond battle tactics. It encompassed engineering, logistics, medicine, and crisis management, all necessary for the comprehensive stabilization of a planet in crisis. As the Kyrax were fully driven back, the Terran fleet maintained a protective presence in orbit, ensuring that no remaining enemy forces could return for revenge. Mara Vance recognized the importance of showing both strength and restraint. The humans had proven they could dominate the battlefield, but their purpose was protection, not conquest. This careful approach reinforced the message that humans were capable of extraordinary power, but exercised it with moral clarity. The Valorians, observing this restraint, they began to trust the humans in a way that few other species had ever managed. Throughout the resolution phase, Captain Vance and her officers faced continuous decision-making challenges. Each choice had consequences, and the margin for error was slim. Should they deploy more troops to a vulnerable region or focus on repairing essential infrastructure first? Should they push the retreating Kyrax harder or conserve energy and resources for civilian protection? Every decision required balancing risk, strategy, and human compassion. The resolution phase was a test of leadership, demonstrating the ability to navigate complex and rapidly evolving circumstances while prioritizing life. Above all else, by the middle of the resolution phase, the most immediate dangers had been neutralized. The Kyrax were in full retreat, their remaining forces scattered and disorganized. Valorian casualties had been minimized thanks to the swift and decisive Terran intervention. Civilians were safe in designated shelters or aboard transport ships, and essential medical care was being administered continuously. The Terran fleet had achieved the primary objectives of the mission: protect lives, neutralize the threat, and stabilize the planet. Yet the resolution phase continued, because the aftermath of a battle is rarely clean or simple. Reconstruction, logistics, and morale remained critical tasks. One notable aspect of the resolution was the interaction between Terran personnel and Valorian survivors. Humans, despite their fearsome reputation, took the time to communicate, reassure, and assist. Leaders and officers moved among the civilians, explaining evacuation procedures, guiding people to safety, and offering support. Medical teams interacted directly with families, providing care, comfort, and hope. The Valorians, who had once regarded humans as dangerous and unpredictable, began to see them as allies and protectors. The resolution phase thus involved not only tactical and logistical work but also the building of trust, a bridge between two species that had little prior interaction. Meanwhile, the Terran fleet conducted systematic sweeps to ensure that no Kyrax ships remained in orbit or nearby space lanes. Surveillance drones monitored potential escape routes, and patrols maintained a visible presence to deter any attempt at retaliation. The resolution phase, in this sense, was as much about securing the future as it was about managing the present. Humans understood that true resolution required more than immediate victory. It required ensuring that peace and stability could be maintained long after the battle ended. By the end of this phase, Valoria was no longer under immediate threat. Fires were being controlled, essential services were partially restored, and the remaining Shirok's forces had been neutralized or forced to retreat far from the planet. The Terrans began coordinating with Valorian leaders to plan long-term reconstruction, including rebuilding homes, infrastructure, and communication networks. The resolution phase highlighted the extraordinary capabilities of the Terrans. Not only could they fight effectively, but they could also restore order, provide care, and build trust across cultural and species divides. Captain Mara Vance reflected on the mission during this phase, recognizing the full impact of their actions. Humanity had not only defended the Valorians but had demonstrated to the galaxy that the Deathworlders could be protectors as well as warriors. The resolution phase, in many ways, was the culmination of this demonstration, that humans had responded decisively to an emergency, adapted to an unpredictable enemy, protected innocent lives, and restored a semblance of stability to a devastated world. It was a testament to the combination of courage, intelligence, discipline, and empathy that defined Terran society. The Valorians, observing the humans' actions, began to change their perception entirely. Where fear had once existed, respect and trust now grew. Leaders publicly acknowledged the extraordinary bravery and skill of the Terran fleet, praising their strategic execution, courage under fire, and commitment to protecting life. The resolution phase was more than just an operational success, it was a diplomatic and moral victory. Humans had demonstrated that they could act with strength without cruelty, with decisiveness without recklessness, and with power guided by compassion. The Valorians were safe, the Kyrax threat was neutralized, and the Terrans had proven their ability to act as both protectors and warriors. The fleets began to withdraw in an orderly fashion, leaving behind infrastructure repair teams, medical personnel, and coordination officers to assist the Valorians in their recovery. The resolution phase concluded with a sense of accomplishment and relief, but also with the recognition that the work of rebuilding and healing was only beginning. The aftermath and reflection. The resolution not only saved lives and restored stability, but it also demonstrated the capacity of humans to act decisively in extreme circumstances while maintaining moral clarity and empathy. It highlighted the unique combination of tactical skill, adaptability, and compassion that defined the Death, transforming their reputation from feared warriors to respected saviors. With the immediate threat to Valoria neutralized and the Terran fleet beginning its gradual withdrawal, the planet finally experienced a quiet that felt almost alien. The fires were smoldering rather than raging. The last Kirax warships were retreating into the distant reaches of space, and the Valorians were beginning to breathe again, cautiously stepping out of shelters and abandoned buildings. It was a moment that came after unimaginable chaos, a moment when the dust of battle slowly settled, revealing the full scale of both destruction and survival. For the Terrans, this phase of the mission, what would later be called the aftermath, was a time for reflection, repair, and understanding the broader impact of their actions. It was a moment for humanity to process what had been accomplished and what it meant, not just for Valoria but for the galaxy and for themselves. Whose civilization had been entirely unprepared for a violent assault, were initially overwhelmed by the scale of Terran intervention. Where they had expected perhaps minimal aid, a small task force, or maybe none at all, they found a fleet of disciplined, organized, and highly capable human ships dominating their orbit and systematically restoring safety. The contrast between the peaceful alien civilization and the powerful humans who had come to their rescue could not have been more stark. For centuries, the Valorians had only known caution and diplomacy in the wider galaxy. Now, they were witnessing a species they had long feared and misunderstood demonstrate not only military strength but also precision, strategy, and compassion. The aftermath was the first real chance for the Valorians to grasp the full scope of what had happened and to begin rebuilding their trust in outsiders. Captain Maravan spent the early hours of the aftermath phase coordinating the ongoing stabilization efforts. Even though the Kirax had retreated, the planet was not safe without continuous oversight. Fires had to be fully extinguished, the wounded needed treatment, and essential services, water, electricity, communications had to be restored in as many areas as possible. The Terrans moved like a single organism. Medical teams, engineers, and security units worked simultaneously, ensuring that no aspect of the planet's recovery was left to chance. Mara's approach reflected the human philosophy that saving lives and restoring order were inseparable. In the chaos of the aftermath, every decision mattered, from allocating medical supplies to directing engineers to critical points of repair. One of the most profound aspects of the aftermath was the interaction between humans and Valorians on a personal level. Civilians, once terrified, now approached the Terran units with tentative gratitude. Children who had hidden in shelters during the attack cautiously came forward to see the humans who had saved them. Elders, who had once doubted the intentions of the Deathworlders, expressed surprise at the care and organization displayed by the Terran crews. For the Valorians, these interactions were transformative. They began to understand that the humans were not merely warriors, they were problem solvers, healers, and protectors. The aftermath, therefore, was not just about physical repair. It was about bridging cultural divides and rebuilding trust in a way that no simple military victory could achieve. Amid this restoration, the Terran fleet maintained a careful watch over the surrounding space. Mara understood that even as the Kirax retreated, the potential for a return attack existed. Scouts and reconnaissance drones were deployed to monitor distant systems. Patrols flew regular circuits around the planet, and early warning systems were established to detect any approaching threats. The aftermath phase required a delicate balance. The humans had to withdraw to allow the Valorians space to recover, but they also needed to remain vigilant. This vigilance underscored the lesson learned from the breaking point. Survival depended not only on victory, but also on preparation for what could come next. The Valorian leaders began organizing their population, using the systems restored by the Terrans. Shelter assignments, supply distribution, and medical triage were coordinated under human guidance, ensuring that as many civilians as possible were protected while the repairs continued. Every aspect of recovery was measured, deliberate, and efficient. Valorians who had once feared chaos now observed humans acting with almost mechanical precision yet without coldness or cruelty. It was this combination of methodical action and moral clarity that left the deepest impression on the survivors. Captain Vance also took the time to reflect personally on the mission during this period. For her, the aftermath was not a time to relax. It was a time to consider the lessons learned, the successes achieved, and the lives saved. She walked the decks of her flagship, observing the crew, checking in on operations, and thinking about the broader consequences of what had occurred. The mission had demonstrated that humanity, often feared as the dangerous Deathworlders, could act decisively in a crisis without succumbing to reckless violence. It had proven that human skill, intelligence, and courage could be guided by ethical purpose, a lesson Mara hoped would resonate beyond Valoria. The Valorians, too, began to engage in reflection. They had watched a species they had long feared act, not as conquerors but as saviors. Their perception of humanity had shifted dramatically. Where once the name Deathworld evoked fear and caution, it now brought admiration and trust. Valorian scholars and leaders began documenting the events meticulously, recording every detail of the Terran intervention, the strategies employed, and the acts of individual heroism that had turned the tide of survival. This documentation would later serve as a historical record, a way for the Valorians to teach future generations about the extraordinary capabilities and moral clarity of a species they had once misunderstood. As the aftermath continued, the broader implications of the mission began to unfold. Other members of the Galactic Concord took note of humanity's actions. Where hesitation and debate had once characterized interstellar responses to crises, humans had acted swiftly, decisively, and effectively.